with her, though. I think it's just as important for Korean people these days, especially younger people, to understand what happened back then, as much as it is for the foreigners, because very distorted viewpoints get put forward. There's a lot of debate, and of course, even a lot of false information, which is kind of the characteristic of our current era, it seems. So we put this together, gonna try to show it's a little, I don't know, random, is as I watched through the series, just whatever I thought was particularly interesting, I grabbed and put into the presentation. It's not complete in any way about what the facts of what really happened or what is really fictitious and never did happen. I'm not trying to have a 100% catalog of all that, but whatever seemed most interesting, most relevant to this, to understand this situation. And in particular, most of this drama, you know, this is 24 hours of film, you know, if you've been through this, and a fair amount of repetition in there as they repeat certain scenes as such, but a whole lot of it is just love story, as with any typical Korean K-drama. It's two people, some man and some woman, looking at each other for a long period of time, looking, and from their face and from their eyes, you're supposed to figure something out. And the love is, as always in Korean dramas, the love is impossible on 3 or 4 different sides. They can't possibly end up happily married together for various reasons, but still they love each other. Anyway, I'm not dealing with that here at all. I'm not getting into the love stories. We're ignoring that entirely. If you want that, watch the series. I'm going for certain details about history. And we're kind of beginning with the big picture, the big picture of what's the problem here? Why was there any problem about anybody taking over Korea in the late 1800s? What's the deal with China? What's Korea been doing in China? And what's with Japan? Why these emotions? All the emotions you see in this drama, these heavy emotions, especially about the Japanese. Why is this? What happened? And this goes back 1,500 years. Of such, so we're going to kind of start there, for just presuming that people don't quite understand that background to this. This is the drama, as we've got here, the good guys, bad guys, etc. And our two mates are Eugene and Aishin, who I'm really not going to talk about much. They're both fictitious characters. They never existed, and nobody like that ever existed. They're created for this drama as such, and it's their love story all through it that kind of propels the plot, but okay. This is also Eugene as a United States Marine Corps member and such, and this guy, one of the main bad guys, Mr. Lee, we'll get to him, you on your own. And et cetera, et cetera. Okay, now notice here, they started putting this up. This was a very controversial drama right from the beginning. When they broadcast the first few episodes, many Koreans protested, and including university professors and as well as common public protested about it right at the beginning. And so they started changing things. They actually changed the script of some of the characters, of who they are in later episodes and what happens to them to meet the protests, unfortunately. Some of the complaints were from university professors saying, just, you know, it's inaccurate. It doesn't go with history. That big thing that just never happened, and it's not even realistic. There was that, and they didn't change very much of those problems. But the problem, there were protests from the common people, even though they show things rather one-sidedly. A lot of common people in Korea made a petition to the White House that it's not one-sided enough. They didn't show the Japanese as evil enough. and wrong about everything, and they didn't show Koreans as totally excellently good people enough, such. And then there were questions about how they show the Americans, which some Koreans want to show Americans as evil and it was all their fault, and other people want to show Americans as the good guys. Together with the Koreans, neither one of which is true. The truth, as always, is very complicated and in the middle. So we go this. So they start doing this. This is a work of fiction based on historical events. They started out with like the 4th episode, putting up this disclaimer. It is a work of fiction. Yeah, this never happened, but it's based on historical events and real historical people, as we will see. Some of the people in this, like Mr. Lee right here, are real people who did real things. Okay, there's just an example of, for the montage of how they show the Japanese as the absolute evil sort of a thing, bloody and delighting in killing and torturing people, enjoying it sadistically, whatever, and as I said, for many viewers, it was not good enough. They should show the Japanese as simply wolves with bloody teeth. Nothing else would even satisfy. As such, now we get this, and again, this is the most famous and iconic scene in this, where they're figuring out each other's identity because they saw each other wearing a bandana across their face, both of them on a secret assassin thing. This is kind of copying from that Brad Pitt movie about Mr. and Mrs. Jones, whatever, figuring out who each other are and who's on which side. Is it possible these front lights, you could lose this, the front lights, I think we want to make the screen a little more distinct for the people.
Yes.
All right, I do have that video summary, but it's perhaps superfluous. We can do that later if needed. Now, we want to get to this. China, Korea, Japan. If I may. You all know this. This is where Russia touches in here. But the situation right from the beginning and such. A point to make, these places, China, Korea, Japan, more isolated from each other than you think. Difficult, through all of history until modern times, difficult for transportation between here. Korea being in here, making its main civilization down here from Pyongyang, down through all here and such, and up here, all through here, through all history, rough, heavy mountains and barbarian tribes who sometimes were kind of kingdoms of Jurchen and Jin and Manchu and such, but other times were just tribal groups, but they were pretty rough and they were nasty and violent and they would kidnap and rob people trying to go through. So it was possible to get here from Pyongyang, through here, and get to China. Possible, but often difficult, dangerous. People were killed, people were lost in the attempt. The sea across here looks kind of short, but it was actually really pretty dangerous. And I don't think there was just not good ship technology. Many ships were lost here in the Yellow Sea, even though the waves are not too bad. The storms are only occasional, but many ships went down. The ship technology was just not very good. For some reason, the Europeans developed much earlier in the Mediterranean Ocean. The Greeks, the Phoenicians, Lebanon, and Egypt and such developed better ships earlier. Such we don't know why, but they did, and it wasn't easy to get across here. And then Japan, really being one of the most isolated countries in the world. On this other side of Japan, out here, there is nothing for a long distance. It's only, and the main center of Japan, always up here, this area, very far from here. There were very few times ever that ships went directly from Japan to China. to try to get up here. This was very long, very dangerous thing. Almost nobody did it. The Japanese would go from here, would of course go to Tsushima Island and then to Korea, and from Korea try to make it over to China. But even that, it was fairly rare. Not that many ever did it. And not that many ever came from this kind of area over to Japan. There wasn't that much communications. These waters, all in here, and especially up in here, where the infamous Dokdo now is, and such. Those are really rough, wild waters, which they still are today. That's why not very many people go visit Dokdo Island, because the waves are huge. The water is super cold. If you fall in the water, you're going to die pretty quickly. And the frequent storms and heavy wind, many times even today, right now, the tourist ships going to Ulleungdo and then trying to get to Dokdo, they have to cancel the trip and go back half the time because the waters are so bad. So there wasn't much travel, wasn't much communication. Japan especially, very isolated. Once they got civilization from Korea, 400, 500 to 600 AD, the Koreans bringing Iron Age civilization over there, and development, things like reading and writing and such, got Japan started, but then they pretty much developed in isolation with very little, only occasional great heroes making it, say, to China and back with any teachings and such, and not even that much with Korea. So, just to impress that upon you, that reality of the isolation, the difficulty. Korea itself, as almost an island, almost this peninsula sticking out in the ocean, fairly not so close to China as you'd think, fairly isolated, kind of ran its own thing going on here. So 3 different countries. Now, as I said, the Koreans brought civilization to Japan more than 1,500 years ago beginning, and so they became the nobility in Japan, mostly. The emperor's family of Japan is originally somebody from the Korean peninsula. And the other nobility, high-level nobles of Japan in these early days, 500 AD to 600 people who got in charge, there was a culture before them of kind of Stone Age people who got into Bronze Age culture. We call them the Jomon culture. They go till 500 or maybe 600. They're kind of finished as these new people are taking over, and it's people from Korea. So, what we call the Japanese are largely actually cousins of Korea. Why do they hate each other so much? Well, you may have experience. Actually, family fighting is the worst kind of fighting. And civil wars are always bloodier than international wars. People who are similar don't like each other. In the same way, the barbarians up here, the Manchurian area, this used to be a Korean kingdom called Goguryeo, and they are cousins of the people down here, the other 2 kingdoms, Baekje and Shilla, and northerners ended up from around here. Gaesong ended up conquering Korea to make the Goryeo dynasty, and that's where our modern Korean language really stems from, etc. They're all cousins up here, cousins of the Koreans, but again, the Koreans never liked them, looked down on them, exactly because they're cousins, but they were less civilized. And this is the way they looked at the Japanese too. Less civilized than us. It is our family, but they're low class, and we are the higher class, and they must recognize this sort of thing. And you can imagine this happening within family groups too. The family members who are the first ones to move to Seoul and ended up living in Gangnam-gu, and the way they look at their cousins who still live in the farmlands, the countryside. And then the people who live in the farmlands, the countryside, they get angry. They may resent that. They say, why are you looking down on us? We're your cousins. And the Manchurians and the Japanese, some resentment there of don't look down on us. Maybe you are more advanced than we are, but still, you should show us respect. We are equal to you. We all came from the same origin, same families, all this. And then there's China over here, and the whole thing. Recognize China has always been 50 times bigger than Korea. Roughly, pretty much all through any history here that starts about 400 AD, China has been 50 times bigger in population and in land size. Even now, right now, still today, if China did take over Korea, sorry, but imagine if China did just take over Korea and make it part of China, all of Korea, North and South Korea together, would only be one province of China, and it would be an average size province. Average. Out of China's 57 provinces, it would not even be a big province of China, all of Korea. It would just be a medium-sized province for China. So, and that's always been all through history. It's been a small population here, their power, next to a giant superpower that was really rich whenever China was united. Many times China was united and strong for 100 years, 150 or so, and then China would start to fall apart, and China would get disunited and be various different countries, and then unite again. Happen. When China was not united, they were busy fighting each other, and that was good for Korea. They couldn't bother Korea. They were busy fighting each other. It did not affect China. When China was united and strong and super rich and had a super military of even millions of soldiers, and Korea maybe had 100,000 at most in all of Korea, if they're lucky. As such, during those times, Korea had a problem. There's this huge superpower right next to them, and a very hungry superpower. China is an empire. It has always been an empire, and it still is today. And that means an empire is something that grows. It tries to grow. It wants more. It's always looking at its neighbors to see what can we take next. And China's still doing that now, and they always have been. So the whole kind of story through 2,000 years of history, more than 2,000 years, China has wanted Korea, but Korea kept their independence from China rather heroically at certain crucial times and such. Koreans have always admired Chinese culture. They like Chinese culture. They have a positive attitude towards China. It's a great civilization, a great country, and they would wear the same hairstyles as the ladies from the Chinese capital were wearing, and they imitated the clothing and used the same government style and architecture motifs. And so they love Chinese culture, but they refuse to be part of China. They've always said, no, we're not Chinese. We're not part of you. And they would fight like hell to keep that independence. And that's been for the main theme for 2,000 years. They like China. They respect China. Such, but they're not going to be part of China. Independent kingdom. Okay. With all that understood, we return. Now, for 1,400 years, there's been a problem. There's been a problem. Let's get into what is this problem. You see, first of all, that China invaded Korea 4 times, tried to take over Korea. Now, the main point is only 4 times. We're talking about 2,200 years, almost. 2,200 years, only 4 times. That's really, really small. You talk to any neighbor of China, talk to the Vietnamese, the Mongolians, the Burmese, the etc., who had to fight China, the Tibetans. How many times did they have to fight China for their independence? You're talking dozens, 15 or 25 or 30 times in cases. And so like with the Vietnam, sometimes the Vietnamese won, sometimes the Chinese won, but it went back and forth 2 dozen times. They had to fight. Korea only 4 times. It's really amazing. That's very few. These are the 4 times. The first one, 108 BC, doesn't even really count because there wasn't any such thing called Korea then. There were just tribal groupings, not even barely confederations, but just groupings of larger groups of tribes. Bronze Age, people struggling to get into the Iron Age. There wasn't anything called Korea, but at this time, China was really a superpower at its maximum capacity. They came north of the Great Wall. You know, the borderline where Koreans first met the Chinese, where they came together, that's called the Great Wall of China. That's why China built the wall. At least the eastern part of it. The western part of it was built because of what we now call Mongolia, the Mongols, the various different kinds of northern people up there. But they started building the wall because of the ancestors of the Koreans, the people who later became the Koreans. They were really scared of them. They built the biggest wall in human history. They were violent pirates on horseback who were raiding and stealing stuff. They built the Great Wall of China, but in this case, 108 BC, China came north of their own. They built the Great Wall to be their border, to be the north border, but they came north through that wall, and they founded Pyongyang City, making it the oldest city in Korea, Pyongyang. It was a Chinese military fortress, and they had some others up through Manchuria at that time, although those didn't last so long, but it ended up being our first civilization. Then, once Korea was organized and Korea